Perfect. So we are recording this session and we will be posting it on YouTube, on the City of St. Albert's YouTube channel, as well as our Cultivate the Conversation page after this evening. So we'd like to start this evening respectfully acknowledging that we are on Treaty 6 territory, traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people. As treaty people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, we share the responsibility for stewardship of this beautiful land. And thank you again for joining us at this time. As noted, you are all muted at this time. We will have time for questions at the end. We want to acknowledge that right now is a really tough time for people with COVID-19 and 2 years into Zoom. People are tired. They may be coming from different struggles in their personal lives. So we just acknowledge that this is a difficult time for people. We ask that you be respectful in your dialogue and that we work together to discuss this topic tonight. We'll give you a little bit of a Zoom orientation. If you are on your desktop or laptop, at the very bottom, you will have a chat function. You should have a raised hand function. We're just going to test that chat function. If you just want to pop into the chat and say hello or good evening, just so we know that you can find that button there. If you are on a phone or another tablet or mobile device, you may have to swipe around a little bit to find your toolbar. Perfect. We see that the chat looks like some people have found the chat. Perfect. Make sure that that is working. Thank you very much. We're going to start by introducing our project team that you see here on your screen tonight. We'll start with Justin Van Dorp. If you want to give a wave, Justin. Justin is the project manager from the City of St. Albert on this project. We have Ben Jonah, our park planning specialist, who's supporting this project as well. Wade Benfield, if you want to give a wave. Thanks, Wade. Wade is our marketing and communications supervisor. He'll be helping manage all of the questions alongside Ben tonight. Will, could you give a wave? Will Pekolik is our landscape architect and project manager from EDA. And Aaron Picard. Awesome. Aaron is one of our project team members and our Parks and Open Space Operations Supervisor here at the city. Just to give you a sense of who everyone is. We're going to start off. Unfortunately, the webinar doesn't let us discuss things quite the way we'd like to, but we are going to start off with a quick poll. I'm going to launch it. It's going to pop up in your screen. Hopefully, if you want to answer that question. So what brought you to today's virtual open house? We brainstormed some answers. There's probably lots of reasons that brought you here, but if you want to just click the one that's most appropriate for you. Awesome. I'm seeing a lot of neighboring landowners, seeing a fair number of Red Willow Trail users, some people seeking information. I'll just give that a few more seconds to let people find buttons and log in. All right, I'm going to end that and share that back with you so you can see. So we've got a really good mix with us tonight. Quite a few neighboring landowners, trail users, people just seeking information and for other reasons. So welcome. We're seeking a lot of different perspectives. We're looking forward to providing you as much information as we can and gathering as much information from you as we can. I'm going to stop sharing that. All right, so I'm going to introduce you to another function on your toolbar. Just at the bottom, you'll see a Q&A button with some bubbles on it. That is where we would ask that you submit any questions that you have for the project team. Please do that throughout the presentation. If you need clarity, if you want more information, please use that function. Ben and Wade will be watching that for you. So they may answer you directly in the text, or we may need to redirect it to one of our subject matter experts here with us tonight. But we would ask that please do that throughout the presentation. It just helps us keep your answers flowing, and so we don't have any wasted time as we get towards the more important discussion part of our evening list today. And just to double check all the buttons are still working, we're going to launch one more poll. If you have taken our survey online, you would have seen this. And we just want to know, how important is it to you to connect the Red Willow Trail system along the Sturgeon River in this project area? A little bit of context for this question. This is the last, within the built area of St. Albert, it's the last trail area in the Sturgeon River Valley that isn't connected. So how important is it to you to connect it? Anywhere from very important to not at all important. All right, seeing a really good mix of perspectives. Just give that a couple of more seconds. All right, we're gonna end that here. And just share that back to you. So again, a very broad mix of perspectives. Some people that think it's really important to have trail connections in this area or additional trail connections. Some people who think it's not important at all. So thank you very much for sharing your perspective there. All right, so we're going to launch into what I hope is informative for you and relatively quick. Please do use that chat function or the Q&A function if there are any technical issues, if I'm talking too fast, if you need some clarity, and we'll try and get that for you. And I blinded myself because I forgot to hit the share screen button first. Sorry about that. Lovely. My team, maybe one of you can give me a thumbs up that you're seeing a slide on the screen. Perfect. So again, welcome. We've introduced you to our team. Our agenda for this evening, we're just going to go through a little bit of the project background. We have divided this project up into three, kind of really four segments. The first from Old Belrose, along Old Belrose, the next Oak Point to Otter Crescent, and then Oak Bay Point to Botanica. Oh, and Andy, someone will try and private message you there and see if we can sort you out if you need something. So just as a really brief overview, the Oakmont Trail project was first concepted through the Red Willow Park Master Plan that was completed in 1991. As I mentioned, it is the last area of the built part of St. Albert that does not have a complete trail connection along the Sturgeon River. The reason being this area is very narrow, it has steep slopes, it has some soil issues and some questions around environmental sensitivity, lots of different things to consider, and so it just hasn't really gone to a full feasibility study yet. So our job tonight and with your help, is to determine if it is feasible to complete the Red Willow Trail system along the Oakmont neighborhood, so on that exterior in the Sturgeon River. And if it is feasible and desirable and all kinds of other considerations, we would move forward towards detailed design. I will emphasize that this project has not been funded for construction. There are no decisions being made. This is looking at the potential for a trail along the Oakmont neighborhood, and there's certainly a lot of things to consider. So a little bit about those lot of things to consider. We do take a lot of factors into consideration whenever we make decisions. We have the public voice or the public input, which is the process that we're in right now, gathering all of the information and knowledge and the years of experience of people who live and play and work near this area. There are policies and programs and improved plans, things like our Red Willow Park Master Plan, our active transportation strategy, our new municipal development plan, all of those kind of things come into play. We have technical, so that's through our engineering standards, as well as legislative requirements largely related to working within the floodplain and the complexities of working within the Sturgeon River's floodplain. And then of course, a whole host of other factors that are specific to this project. So a little bit of an overview of the trail segments that we'll be discussing tonight. The first is the Old Belrose, sometimes called Old Belrose Trail, Old Belrose Road. This is a functional formal gravel road. It is not built as a trail, but it is commonly accessed even now or today for pedestrians and bikers and all kinds of things. Trail segment 2 is this blue section down here that connects from the green, which is an existing trail connection, and would connect people along Otter Crescent. And then we have the Oakmont Bridge here and Trail Segment 3 that goes along Orchard Court all the way to this red line, and that's that existing trail segment in behind the Botanica building. So just a little bit of context of where we are in the city. So as part of the initial stages, we did have consultants come out and do a biophysical assessment on the area that we'd be looking at. Of course, people are pretty aware the area throughout here slopes towards the Sturgeon River. The land in the north, or Old Belrose, is pretty flat. Our steepest areas are directly adjacent to that Boudreau Developments or riverbank landing proposal. And the topsoil in this area is silty, so kind of finer, and black to dark brown, ranging anywhere in depth from 0.1 to 1.1 meters. And that topsoil depth is really important for trail construction and how stable it is and what we need to do to make sure that it stays stable. So we are fortunate enough that there was an extensive amount of geotechnical investigation that has been done for other projects in this region. So each of these blue dots is a test hole for geotechnical that was done prior to our study. We were able to go out and complete an additional 3 test holes, just in areas where we're missing information. So our analysis used both the existing borehole data and those 3 new boreholes. We did see some evidence of slope instability, some really minor landslides, kind of localized to the top layers of the soil, but definitely there, as well as that visible slumping, or where the river bed, or sorry, the shore seems to kind of slide towards the river, so that's slumping near the river. The recommendations that we received back from our geotechnical assessment was wherever we can, wherever it's possible, bring that trail at least 5 meters from the top of slope. Minimize your cut, which is where we remove soil from an area, and minimize your fill, which is where we bring soil into an area. So minimize those requirements as much as possible. Limit vegetation removal. So tree roots, especially those big mature ones, help keep that soil in place on those slopes. So limit how much you have to remove, and complete additional soil stability assessments once you move towards design, if we move towards design. So in terms of water in this area, there are no water bodies outside of the Sturgeon River, so no wetlands within the project area. This whole project area is essentially within either the floodway, which is this orange corridor, sorry, wrong screen, orange corridor, and that is the area where in a flood event, the waters are fastest and deepest. There is some part of the project area in this blue, which is the flood fringe, which is the areas that would still flood potentially in a 1 in 100 year flood event, but those waters wouldn't be as fast or as deep. There are 4 existing stormwater outfalls in this area as well that the trail needs to take into consideration. So a little bit about the vegetation that we found in the area. First, looking at Old Belrose. The top area is mostly that balsam poplar or trembling aspen that you see everywhere around our region. There is a little bit of upland grassland in the yellow up at the top here, and a little bit down here at the bottom. And no rare plant communities were found in this part of the study area. In terms of the south, you see a lot more diversity, a lot more colors. We have some of that poplar and trembling aspen forest. We have some Manitoba maple forest areas, and that's an invasive species for the Sturgeon River Valley. We do have some upland grassland, so that drier grassland in the yellow. We have riparian grassland, or that wetter grassland further closer to the river. We do have some manicured grassland as well, so that traditional lawn turf type grasses. And we do have some upland grasslands as well. And I repeated that, my apologies. For wetland communities, we do have both graminoid marsh and shrubby swamp communities, and those are all located closer to the river. And again, in this study area, no rare plant communities. In terms of wildlife, there's the potential for nesting in this area by most of the bird species that do use the Sturgeon River corridor. So nothing that would exclude any specific species. We do expect to see kind of the same mix of birds that we see across the Sturgeon River Valley. There are more species to be likely in the south area than the north area. And again, that's largely due just to a more varied vegetation type. For amphibians, we're likely to see boreal chorus and wood frogs, as well as common and plains garter snakes throughout this area. Our mammals are going to be dominated by coyotes as the most abundant. You'll see a lot of small and mid-sized mammals, and it is a travel corridor for both moose and deer. For wildlife, we have no identified records of special status wildlife species. So that is a record set kept by the province around any at-risk or endangered species. We don't see any of those being identified, at least to date, in the corridor. The South Study area, so that area along the Sturgeon River Valley, is part of the mapped regional ecological corridor. So we know that it's really important as a wildlife corridor. The North Study area is considered a stepping stone habitat. So those are really important, smaller habitat areas that allow wildlife to move from place to place with urban areas in between. And they're really important for respite and for food and to give kind of a safe space for wildlife to move through the urban area. We do know that the top of bank or the flat areas along the Sturgeon River are likely used for wildlife movement, far more so than closer to the river. So on top of the biophysical and geotechnical assessments, we do have some more work that has to be done, and unfortunately can't be done until the spring when the ground thaws a little bit. So the entirety of the Sturgeon River Valley is mapped to have the potential for historic resources of value, in this case, particularly archaeological value. We have been directed by the province to complete a historic resource impact assessment. So we'll have a qualified archaeologist come out and make sure that there are no artifacts that we could possibly damage through any type of construction activity. We will complete additional geotechnical assessments once we know further where we're going to go and where we might look to build, if anywhere. And we are also going to work with our Indigenous partners to understand if there's any traditional uses or cultural uses to this area that we need to be aware of. So still a little bit of work and information to be collected on this feasibility study. I'm just going to take a pause here, make sure that everything's going well. I'm assuming someone's going to flag me if it's not. All right. So moving on to what I'm sure you're most interested in, our proposed trail alignments. So looking at segment 1 first, the proposal is potentially to look to convert what is an existing gravel road that is quite wide to a more standard, what the Red Willow Trail system looks and feels like, 3-meter asphalt trail. So connecting from the existing trail connection at the top here, coming all the way down Old Belrose through a single straight line alignment. There is the potential to connect up here to Oak Hill Place. One thing that we have noted is this is extremely steep. So to connect it by a normal asphalt trail, sorry, I'm losing my mouse, is very difficult. So we may have to look at an alternative like stairs or just leave it as it is, a grass connection that might be used by people but isn't intended to be used by people. So not very many options here. And I will say that as I go through this presentation, there is an option always to not move forward, to not change. So the options I'm presenting to you tonight are to change from current state. Obviously, we would consider doing nothing and allowing things to continue as they are. But to present you the options, we're just going to focus on those that would introduce change. So that is our Old Belrose Trail. A few of the things that we have considered, and we've been hearing lots more over the last week or so and getting your feedback already, but some of the early things we considered is converting this to a Red Willow Trail standard would be consistent with the existing system. It would not require any new environmental disturbance. It would actually allow us to improve the amount of trees or increase the amount of trees and really close in that corridor, make it a little bit more narrow, give more opportunity for tree planting and that kind of thing. An asphalt trail can be cleared in winter where a gravel trail cannot. And asphalt trails are a completely accessible service. We could make this accessible for those with mobility aids or strollers or walkers. Gravel is a somewhat accessible surface, but asphalt is obviously a much smoother, easier surface to travel on. Some of the cons that we have thought about is it would increase the maintenance costs. We're not currently maintaining it, which can be problematic, I'm hearing, in the spring. So there would be some increased costs, not only with construction, but maintenance. And again, we do have those really steep slopes that are hard to manage from Oak Hill Place. All right, so moving on to the next section. So we are looking at this. I was working with people who know how to do this much better earlier today. This blue segment here, all the way from Oak Point along to Otter Crescent here. So we would connect up at the north here and bring the trail, like the majority of our Red Willow Trail system, away from the street into the trees and into the open marsh area. Bring it back up and connect to the existing sidewalk just at the south end there. So there are two sub options within this option. The first is to keep it as a Red Willow Trail standard, to look at it as a standard 3-meter asphalt trail. The second option is to narrow that down, reduce the impact, reduce the construction requirements to a 1.5-meter wide gravel trail. Now, 1.5-meter trail allows one wheelchair, one large mobility aid to move freely down the trail surface without obstacle. It does not allow for two-way traffic, but it is wide enough to allow for one person that needs, a large stroller or a wheelchair or something like that to travel around. So that's why that 1.5-meter is being suggested. So this is the first option. It is designed to weave in and around existing tree stands and work with the existing slopes. So it does look a little bit odd, like why there, why not closer to the river or further from the river? And it is largely related to the existing vegetation and existing terrain, why we've chosen this option to share with you. The second option, oh, and I'm pushing the wrong screen, is to move the trail and connect again up at this existing one, all the way down the edge of Otter Crescent. So taking advantage of those beautiful views of the Sturgeon River. Within this option, we have two sub options. The first is to take the very edge of that roadway, clear the trees. So you can see down here, right here, we would have to remove some vegetation, but build a 3-meter asphalt accessible trail right alongside that road. There would be no separation between the roadway and the trail. So most of our sidewalk and trail systems have a boulevard. This one, in order to minimize vegetation and keep on that top of that slope, we would not have any boulevard. It would just be road, then trail, but it would maintain the existing travel lanes. The second option, shown as B2 on your screen, is to take a portion of that road, remove the on-street parking along that blue alignment. So all the way along here, we'd remove the on-street parking, narrow that travel lane, and simply pin curbs, so pin concrete curbs onto the existing asphalt. So obviously no vegetation has to be removed, and it's quite an inexpensive option. So again, hearing lots and lots through the feedback we've already received, but some of the initial things we thought about, that 3-meter wide and that option A, so bringing you closer to the river, is very consistent with our existing Red Willow Trail system. It gives you that Red Willow Trail experience where you're closer to nature, you have trees around you, you're hearing and smelling and feeling closer to the river. It would be an accessible option. We do know there are invasive species communities in this area that we could do some selective clearing, get rid of some of those Manitoba maple trees and that kind of thing that are invasive, allow us to do a bit of weed control as we move through construction. Again, it would be cleared in winter. The 3-meter trail option does have some drawbacks, particularly relatively high tree loss so that we can get the trail in there. It may also require us bringing that fill or that soil into the floodplain, which does require provincial approval, and we do not take lightly. So we want to avoid doing that wherever we can, but might be unavoidable on some options. So looking at the second kind of sub option, so bringing you again closer to that river, but that 1.5-meter wide gravel trail. Again, it does have that nice trail experience. You're walking in nature. We're not likely to require fill or soil. Again, that opportunity to clear some invasive trees. And aside from the using the existing roadway option, this has the lowest impact to tree clearing because with gravel trails, we are able to kind of weave our way around trees and make sure that we're maintaining those mature trees or potentially purposely going through some of those species that we want to get rid of anyways. Some of the cons to this is obviously it's not a Red Willow Trail standard. It's not a trail standard that you'll see in the existing Red Willow Trail standard, and it doesn't meet our active transportation strategy goals. It does have reduced accessibility. It's not inaccessible, but it is less accessible than pavement, and it could not be cleared in winter. Every time I switch screens, I'm so sorry. So looking at that option B, you're coming along the roadway, adding that multi-use trail. Some of the pros are it is completely aligned to our active transportation strategy, so bringing people off the street and onto trail. It does maintain that street cross section. It could bring people, we do know there existing foot access into that floodplain. It could bring people away from that, and it's an accessible option. Again, it could have some impacts to on-street parking availability, maybe, probably not. It is not consistent with what it is like to be on the Red Willow Trail system now, so that street adjacent isn't quite what we have elsewhere. It's a little bit of a reduced trail experience, and adjacent to the road is where we see some of the more mature, valuable trees, so we have a relatively high tree loss required to put this option in place. Looking at that isolated shared use, so again, away from the river, up on the road, pinning on a curb along the roadway, we wouldn't have any tree loss. It does still serve that function of reducing impacts from human access. It would be an accessible option. It is, again, inconsistent. It removes that on-street parking availability, and trails with no separation from the roadway is not preferred under active transportation strategy. So some drawbacks on that option as well. Moving on to Oak Bay Point. So this is kind of 3A, so the first part of our third segment of trail. Sorry, I'm gonna try and draw for you. So just along here, so there's an existing access. Down here is the Oakmont Bridge. This trail kind of hugs the top of bank alongside Oak Bay Point. It is really close to some of these landowners. Their private property lines marked by red. Each of these gray contour lines as you come in indicates a change in slope. So as you can see, slopes change a lot here. So that's quite challenging. This area in particular, we may have to look at switchbacks or stairs, which could reduce accessibility. We may be able to pave, but it is quite steep in here. But it would continue along to the existing sidewalk up here. Come down. This again is a very steep alignment. We'd have to potentially look at some terracing or some stairs of some kind to connect. But that would run across the top of the bank, as far back from the private property as we can, acknowledging that the drop off towards the river occurs really close to the property line. So very little options here. Clear my drawings because they carry over. And moving to the last segment, and I will stop talking soon, I promise, is our Oak Bay Point to Botanica. So the first option that we've come up with. So again, up at that corner there, this same PUL public utility lot connection down the hill. Coming across, you can see the lines here, these gray lines. We have a little bit more space up here, but not a ton. But coming along the private landowners here in the environmental reserve, we have identified a potential to put a trail connection. This is the road right-of-way that currently exists kind of in the middle of Orchard Court there. So connecting up the outfall structure through a trail. Showed as dotted because it is an added element. It isn't needed for connectivity, but could be nice for those that are traveling within the Oakmont neighborhood and just want to skip down into the trail system. So there is an outfall structure. That's what this green little groove is. So looking at a bridge structure right here, coming across and up into the Bridge Developments land. So this is the Riverbank landing area. So coming up and working with Bridge Developments to connect across the private property and into their development. And then coming down across a second outfall structure. This is quite steep, as well as having an outfall and water running towards the river. So looking at a stair bridge combo structure here. And then all the way down to this brown point here at the bottom, that's that existing trail stub behind the Botanica building. So this is the more complex segment of the trail in terms of the amount of slopes we have to traverse and the outfalls that we have to cross. Moving on to the second option. And again, reminding you as you're listening to me that all of these options are with a do nothing option in the background. Kind of the same coming along Orchard Court. We don't have a lot of opportunity for change. That same optional trail connection up towards the road right of way up in Orchard Court. Same bridge structure, coming across the same into the riverbank landing area, but instead of carrying all the way through, looking at creating a set of stairs where it makes sense with the slope and the building development and the pedestrian connectivity within riverbank landing, bringing it down the slope, connecting through this white and yellow line, which would be a boardwalk. So bringing people really close to the river. Boardwalks are a kind of flood resistant option, so we can bring them closer to the river. Would be a very similar type of experience to what people experience at the Donny Pool wetland boardwalks. Bringing back up to a 3-meter asphalt trail, again connecting behind Botanica. So that is option 3B, option B. So some things that we have considered in that first section where we're really close to landowners, that's obviously the biggest drawback, is that is very close to private residences, and we've heard lots of concerns and certainly acknowledge that it is very close. There's not a lot of options there in terms of what is feasible. As well, that top of bank access may be preferred by some wildlife species. We do know our coyotes and our moose and our deer will walk on our trails, but that's obviously not a preferred thing for our wildlife. So looking at impacts potentially to wildlife movement and whether that can be managed. Some of the advantages is it is very consistent with the existing Red Willow Trail system. It aligns to our active transportation strategy. Because we're looking at a top of slope trail, it is reducing those floodplain impacts. It has excellent views of the Sturgeon River, as those who live there will attest. And we also have the opportunity again to enhance our native plantings post-construction, again, getting rid of some of those invasives and manicured pieces and moving to a more naturalized plant community. So looking again at Orchard Court to Botanica Trail across the riverbank landing. So connecting first option with the outfall with a bridge, coming across riverbank landing, and then taking that bridge stairs down to the existing trail stub behind Botanica. Some of the advantages is it does connect really nicely to the existing and planned commercial developments. We have heard some call for fitness through stairs. Some people want that in the city, and we don't really have an opportunity to provide it elsewhere. So there is some benefit to that. Again, reduce floodplain impacts by going way up at the top of the bank using that private land. Some of the cons are we don't have stairs in our existing Red Willow system and actively avoid them as they are a barrier for accessibility. We're not able to clear those stairs in winter based on our current operations. Our steep slopes are really challenging for construction, which usually means costly as well. There may be unavoidable impacts to the riparian areas from construction because it is a very tricky area to get into. And again, stairs required, which limits the accessibility of this trail segment. So looking at some of the things we've thought about for the option B, which again is that one that comes across the outfall, first outfall with a bridge, partway through the riverbank landing or the Boudreaux development property, down the slope by stairs and into a boardwalk across the riparian zone. Again, it connects to those planned commercial developments. It's a very unique trail experience we're not able to provide elsewhere. And boardwalks are relatively uninvasive in terms of floodplain impacts. They tend to we're able to raise them above the vegetation and reduce the impacts from people's feet and from construction. Again, the limitations, it's construction with the within the floodplain, which can be very challenging. It is not consistent with the existing Red Willow Trail system. Again, that unavoidable impacts to construction because of how difficult it is to get in there. Stairs are required. Boardwalks would not be cleared in winter. They're damaged by our snow clearing equipment, so we wouldn't be able to clear that in winter. The boardwalk itself may be susceptible to flooding. And it would remove that direct access from the trail system to the shops at Boudreaux as well. So I'm hopeful that that's giving you a good overview. There is obviously lots of information available through conversation.stalbert.ca/Oakmont-trail. So at this point, I'm going to open it up to questions and stop sharing my screen. We are going to go through the submitted questions first. And then if folks would like to speak, please use the raise hand function and we can unmute you. But we are going to go through the submitted questions first. Oh, and I forgot, I have another poll for you while we get ourselves organized. Almost forgot. So the city is going to use a number of factors or a matrix of factors to determine what trail alignment should be recommended for construction, if any of them. Based on what you've heard tonight and what you've read, can you please select the 3 most important factors for you when the city is selecting a trail alignment option? I'll give that a minute. Lovely, I'm still seeing lots of people still responding, so we'll just give it a few more seconds. Oh, I'm sorry, Jennifer. I can see that you can't see the poll. I'm unfortunately not a Zoom expert. Hopefully it's popped up for you. All right, I'm going to end that poll now. And share that back to you. So we're seeing a lot of emphasis on environmental sensitivity, maybe a little bit less emphasis on public support, but certainly almost equal on the rest of them, which doesn't make our job any easier. But that's completely valid. All of these things are very important to consider. So I thank you for your input there. Just going to ask my team to turn on their cameras if they could. And I'm going to do my very best to stop talking so much and let the experts in the room talk. Unfortunately for me, the first question is something that I think I have to answer. So our first question is, what assurances are in place to obligate the owners to provide the land for the trail? And I'm assuming that is related to the riverbank landing, and we are in active conversations with Boudreaux Developments. They are very committed to working with the city on this project. Additionally, within the area structure plan amendment for this, you will see that east-west trail kind of obligated through the area structure plan process. So we have identified it as a necessary connection as part of that ASP approval. So there's a couple of different ways, and we'll be working with Boudreaux Developments quite closely if this were to move forward. All right. So kind of similar along the same lines, is there a formal agreement between the city and private landowner at Riverbank Landing? And if so, does that agreement grandfather to future owners of the property? So no, at this time, there is no formal agreement because we have not decided to build the trail. As we move towards making a decision and potentially constructing this trail, we would look to those kind of binding options that do run with the land to protect that conductivity long term. That being said, through the ASP process, there will be a trail of some kind built that will connect. It's just whether it will connect to the rest of the Sturgeon River system or whether it will be just part of the internal circulation system within Riverbank Landing itself. So there will be a trail of some kind built as part of that development. Whether it will be part of the private development or connected to the larger Red Willow Trail system is what we're figuring out now. Hope that answered that question. Maybe I'll see if Justin wants to give this one a go. This is a tough question. It says, could the term feasible be replaced with needed, or is the decision made to proceed if feasible? Justin, do you want to try and give that one a go?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't see why it can't be replaced with needed for initial discussions here. And then, yeah, if we, yeah, determining feasibility right now, right? So I think that's a valid point to consider at this point.
Will, anything from your perspective on that as the lead on the feasibility?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we need to first establish when we say feasible is before we even ask the question, is it needed, is can it even be built? And then we can establish that question, is it needed as well? So I think that goes hand in hand with, is it even possible to entertain? And then is it needed kind of dovetails quite nicely with that question.
All right, well, I got another one for you. It says, it says, did you consider a floating boardwalk trail in the wetlands similar to Johnny Pool wetlands as an option to the top of bank in the steep area? So kind of that front section of trail segment 3.
Yeah, I think that question came in before we got to the third section there. So yes, we definitely have everything is on the table at this point. The options that were presented tonight are not meant to necessarily represent every possible permutation or combination of trails. It's mostly meant for discussion, costing, and general feasibility. So I think floating trails would be worth exploring and discussing, and it would really come back down to stakeholder engagement and city council approval in terms of the costing and how that might work and be maintained long term.
Awesome, thank you, Will. So that's cost and maintainability are two really important factors when we look at boardwalks in particular. They are more expensive than traditional trail, and they can be much more difficult to maintain, but certainly not off the table. I'm going to put this to Aaron and maybe Justin. Sorry, guys. Might you consider a cold mix coating for Old Belrose?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. Yeah, it's certainly something that can be considered. Again, from a maintenance long-term kind of perspective, that's something that we would have to weigh in with the cost options of that. So, Aaron, I don't know if you have anything else to add to
I
that.
think that kind of covers it.
All right, so the next question is, why are you considering the standard size trail when our existing trails are narrow and become congested? The road size works well and doesn't disturb environment. I'm gonna, maybe Aaron, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think it's all three of the options are a consideration. The leaving it as is was one. The second one was the narrowing and allowing things to go down to our 3-meter wide trail, and we want to hear back from the community too a little bit on that one. The accessibility piece is one of those, and if we do narrow to a 3-meter asphalt trail, the environmental ability to start to let the trees encroach back and provide even more of a forested kind of atmosphere as you're traveling that trail, we wanted that considered as an option and to get a feel from people on what they felt about that.
Anyone else want to jump in on that one? I think you did a great job. The naturalization, I know, is one of Will's important points to make on that one, is there's some definite benefits to renaturalizing those edges because it is a quite wide corridor. So looking at Old Belrose, can you confirm the connection into Erin Ridge and Erin Ridge North from this area? Does this add any easy connectivity to these areas and into the annexed areas of Sturgeon County? So I will give that one a go, and maybe I'll just wave my hand, team, if you want to jump in as well. So at this time, Old Belrose connects to Belrose, both the sidewalks along Old Belrose and through an existing trail connection. We have been talking with Sturgeon County around the potential. Sturgeon County does see the benefits of bringing a trail that would eventually connect into Old Belrose from Sturgeon County itself. It is a fair distance for Sturgeon County to cover with trail and a relatively short distance for the city to connect to, but that is part of the active conversation. So anything else on that one, anyone? Oh, Aaron.
I think if I'm reading this correctly too, Sandy was wondering about the going into Erin Ridge North, so I'm assuming that's on the old coal mine road which is not at an urban standard as of yet. So the idea would be, I think, Amanda, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, that as those areas develop, the connectivity would be considered to make sure that those are all connected.
Yes, that's great, Erin. Thank you. Erin knows the city a lot better than, well, pretty much anyone, but me especially. So the next question is, instead of stairs to deal with slope at the Botanica riverbank landing, might the city consider utilizing the easement held for the stormwater system at the head of the ravine? Will, does that hit your wheelhouse?
I would need to have a look at what that head of the ravine is. I don't know that we've explored that in depth at this point. Right now, every option that we're looking at is all relative to grading constraints and trying to maximize accessibility, but it's definitely something that we can take away and explore further.
Yeah, thank you. And if whoever submitted that question wants to clarify or give a street name or something, we can circle back to that as well. And looking at the next question, so Oak Bay to Botanica, how is the city proposing protecting these nesting areas that are currently marked by the city each spring and summer? So that's a really good question. Erin, do you mind starting with that one?
I can do a little bit. I'm missing my Melissa here tonight for that, but I believe, Sandy, I'm guessing you're referring to the A-frame signs that have been put up the last couple of seasons. I hope that's the case. And with any of our construction projects, whether they're in the river valley or not in the river valley, all of that, when we get to a design phase, all of that would have to be considered, and it's certainly part of the discussion. I think Manda mentioned wildlife and different things along there, so we haven't got down to the specifics on those exact sites, but that's all under consideration in the design process.
Perfect. So looking at the next question we have, does the proposed trail connect to Boudreaux Road? And I'm hoping that I'm interpreting which road you mean, but Boudreaux Road. So there's the existing trail in behind Botanica. So we would connect to Boudreaux through that connection. So coming in behind Botanica. Then looking at the next question, which is related. So trail section option, section 3 option B, so that's that boardwalk coming in behind, would not connect directly to the shops at Boudreaux. Where would it end and what would it connect to? So option A, through the riverbank landing and the pedestrian connection system in riverbank landing would allow you to go between riverbank landing and we have a little side connection that would go towards the shops at Boudreaux. Option B doesn't have that little side connection. It connects again to that existing trail in behind Botanica, so you'd have to pop out onto Boudreaux and head north and around to the shops at Boudreaux. All right, looking at the next question, who stands to financially benefit? And I'm guessing that's a general question, not related to any specific segment. I'll give that one a go, but if there's some specificity or clarity to that question, that would be lovely. In terms of financial benefits, trails are not usually a financial benefit. They are certainly built because they build great communities. They're for active transportation, they're for connecting, getting closer to nature without tromping all over it. There's lots of societal, social, active living and health benefits to trails. There is occasionally financial benefits to nearby landowners, but sometimes it can actually be seen as a detraction too. So I don't know if there's any clear financial winners or losers with this project or any of this proposal. It's certainly a social and a active living health benefits driven project. Erin or Justin, do you want to add anything to that?
Nope, I think that's good.
Great answer.
All right, so what approval process is required by council to proceed with the project? Is this an ASP amendment? So no, this is not an ASP amended process. Trails are built in the city through administration. How council provides their kind of support is through funding. So through the budget process, they'll debate what administration is proposing to do and choose to fund it or not. That being said, in this case, because we are having to look at compromises and changes from the standard, there is the potential that our project team will want to have a discussion with council to get their perspective from their residents and what they're hearing on the acceptability of some of these compromises or some of these impacts to people. So with this project, which we don't necessarily do for every project, we may need to have another conversation with council because this is a non-standard, very tricky place to build trails. So we have to make some compromises and council may want to weigh in on those. Perfect. Thank you very much for the person who clarified. So the ravine that was being spoken about, so that option to not, sorry, I'm going to go back to the previous question so I don't misphrase it. And I'm scrolling way too fast. I appreciate everyone's patience. So instead of stairs to deal with the slope at Botanica Riverbank Landing, might the city consider utilizing the easement held at the stormwater system at the head of the ravine? And for clarification, the ravine I'm speaking to is at the south end of the Riverbank Botanica development or the northwest edge of the newest building. So that's outfall 2, Will.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. That was, I was hoping you didn't call on me because I was reading back and forth between the questions while Aaron was answering a few of them, just to get my head around that. So when we did our site investigations, Ken, we actually walked that, that corridor, and it is quite narrow, and there would be a number of concessions that would need to be made. Number one, we're right on the edge of Botanica's property, and we would need to have that concession made to have a partly public, partly private edge of the trail development. As well, that slope, based on our site surveys, were in excess of a 4-to-1 or 25% slope, which is more than double our target amount. Unfortunately, because of the site constraints, we wouldn't be able to get a switchback in there. So we would need stairs. So the thought process right now that we're considering is, do we have stairs across the outfall or in parallel with the outfall where we'd make a second connection? So it's on the table, but for the options that we've presented right now, we feel that we're trying to show one with a connection into Botanica and Riverbank Landing, and one without. And again, bear in mind that no decisions are made and we're just trying to get a feel and a direction from this engagement process. So is it possible? It certainly is. Did we look at it? Yes, that specific part we did look at. Actually, I believe, Manda, you and I walked that together. And it was a bit of a challenging traverse to get up, even with stairs. But again, it's on the table, but it won't be without its trade-offs for accessibility and logistics.
Perfect. Thank you, Will. So the next question is, reference is made to steepness and possible use of switchbacks, yet there is a steep grade on Red Willow Trail that is east of Canadian Tire. My point is much as there is much made of accessibility, sorry, it appears that there are concessions to build trails on steep sections without stairs. So absolutely, we do need to make compromises in certain situations and in certain steepnesses. So we have considered that where we could still provide access, but a reduced accessibility. Slopes, and particularly steep slopes, obviously have some safety concerns and can ice over in the wintertime and be challenging for our equipment to actually move up and down from an operation standpoint. In the areas where we have proposed stairs, they are because the slope is so steep that it wouldn't be possible or safe to walk up and down. You'd need stairs to make that connection safely. But certainly in areas where we're kind of borderline, we could look at kind of relaxing those guidelines and putting other barriers like bollards in place and signs for people to slow down. But in the areas where we've proposed stairs, it's because the slope is far too steep to even consider constructing a trail down. Will or Aaron, anything to add to that one?
No, other than just to reiterate what you had said earlier too, that along with all of these pieces is the maintenance piece that comes after the fact. How do we maintain it summer? How do we maintain it winter? All of those different factors are all come into play too as we start to look at these various different ones.
All right, so the next question is there not a standard easement between landowners' property and where trails are built? Some of the proposed trails appear to butt up right against some properties. Justin, do you want to speak to that?
Sorry, lost my mute button there. So sorry, what was the question there? That was the.
Oh, apologies, Justin. I should have gotten your attention first. Is there not a standard easement between landowners' property and where trails are built? Some of the proposed trails appears to butt right up against properties.
That's a good question. We have to go back and double check through our standards on that one to see what the easement is. Yeah, I know there is a setback typically required between property and trails, so we'd have to go and reference that obviously in our designs and everything.
Thank you, Justin. And to give a sense of scale, I think we'd have to double check. I think it's 2.5 meters, Aaron. Something like that. We'll clarify that in what we heard from tonight. Thank you. All right, so what is the next step? Will there be further public consultation? So that's a great question. I'll give a stab at it and then project team jump in. So at this stage, we are collecting a lot of information to inform our feasibility study. One of the poll questions that you were asked was related to the priority of different considerations. So Will and his team are going to build a matrix to help us work through all of this feedback and what's really important to people and what's really important to the city to kind of put some recommendations together. And then we will put some recommendations together and move forward from there. As I mentioned, it may involve some council discussion as well. So right now we're just trying to get through the feasibility study to figure out what kind of the best path forward might be. And then we have some more decisions to make from there. Does anyone want to add to that? All right. So the next question, I appreciate concerns of locating a trail close to property lines, but there are various instances where the trail is located adjacent to multiple property lines with separations of less than a meter. It is regrettable that the city approved development without adequate setbacks, but this should not unnecessarily prevent the city from advancing Red Willow Trail development. So that's a really good point. There are some benefits, obviously, that the city sees and some preferences from people to see this area connected. So we are working in a very tricky area. So I guess we'll just acknowledge that you know, what's built is built, and we are doing our best to determine if it's feasible to fill the trail gaps. But we appreciate that comment. It says, and the next question. Can we ensure that the east side of Belrose Road connection between the Riverbank Landing development and back of Orion Close houses, back of Orchard Court houses, down to the river, north and south direction, where a walking bridge is shown on the 3B drawing? And I'm sorry, I don't think I understand the question. If whoever submitted that could reframe it, or if somebody caught the meaning there that I didn't. Just looking to my team.
Amanda, would you be able to reread the question?
Absolutely. So it says, can we ensure the east side of Belrose Road connection between the Riverbank Landing development and back of Orion Close houses and back of Orchard Court house down the river, north-south direction? So those Orchard Court residents that are north-south, where a walking bridge is shown on the 3B drawing.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know that I know there's a question there. I'm assuming it's about making a connection into the cul-de-sacs, but that is an assumption. So I think a rephrasing or re-asking the question might be in order.
Yeah, if we could just ask the person to help us along a little bit and give us a little bit more information, we'll circle back to that one. Just looking now. Wade, are we receiving any more questions in? Oh, Wade's fingers are tired because you guys are being so engaged. We really appreciate it.
And I think there's
one coming
to you. I see one
Perfect.
in the chat that is coming over, I believe.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Says, just FYI, the trail behind Enderby Crescent is less than 1 meter. I'm assuming that's less than 1 meter from property lines. We do not, and that's a really good point. Outside of the Red Willow Trail system, within our parks and trail system, there are certainly many instances throughout the city where trails are quite close to private property lines. So outside of the Red Willow Trail system, that does happen based on site design and how developers build and how the city builds. So it's not uncommon to see, although we do try and at least provide that 2.5 meter buffer. All right, this one's a long one. So the truncated section of trail behind Botanica is super awkward. People's living rooms are almost right on top of the trail, and you can see inside all the units as you walk, bike, and run by. The Tenor development on the other side of the river opposite Rivercrest is also close to the trail, but has an elevation difference which makes it less awkward. My ask or request is that while working with the Riverbank Landing folks, that this should be taken into consideration. So I can speak a little bit to that. We were able to speak with the Botanica condo board members a couple of weeks ago, and they did note some of the same concerns. So looking at some potential options to make people feel more comfortable, but that's a really great comment about working with the Riverbank Landing folks. I will say that the setback, because of the height of the buildings on Riverbank Landing, is much larger than it is for Botanica. So hopefully that will be less of a concern, but absolutely that's a great comment to work with Boudreaux and make you feel like you're not walking through someone's backyard or front room as it may be. All right, I'm seeing questions slow down. I'm just looking to wait. Do we want to open it up or are you still just catching up?
Yeah, I think we're just trying to catch up on a couple more, but could be a good chance to maybe ask people if they have anything that they want to ask right now, and then I'll keep putting in what we receive into our chat.
Perfect. So at this time, we would invite you using that raise hand function at the bottom. If you'd like to ask your question out loud, this would be a good time to do so. Just looking at the reactions button. Everybody's very quiet tonight. I think I've talked more today than I've talked in the last week, and that's impressive for me. So I'd love to hear any of you speak. All right. Oh, we have Hugh Campbell. I'm just going to push the allow to talk button, and just you may have to unmute yourself as well. Just have a look before you start talking. Yeah, we can see you now, Hugh, but you are still muted.
There.
There we go.
I would share that I live in Oak Bay Point, and on Oak Bay Point, the trail will come right along my property line, and my comings and goings will be quite visible to everybody who happens to walk by on Sunday afternoon, and that's a concern for me.
Thank you, Hugh. So hearing a concern about visibility and loss of privacy and potentially traffic very close to your home. Is that accurate?
Yes, and possibly security, and also wildlife disruption. We used to have many deer come by my property since Botanica was built. I haven't seen a single deer. There's been an occasional moose, but much less than previously. And there are prairie chickens and all kinds of waterfowl, and to disrupt their lives would be a travesty to me. And
Yeah.
I'll shut up now.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much for sharing. All right, so I do see another question here. What consideration has been given to attempting to build a paved trail on top of the utility corridor that directly runs behind the homes at Oak Bay Point? i.e., is it even possible? Justin or Will, do you want to take that?
I'll maybe let Will jump in on that one.
Sure. I think that one is a very similar situation to our section 1, where it is feasible. It is an option, but it is quite a steep utility lot based on our surveys. So again, that would be one of those nice to haves, but it would be an optional. And I think that would come back to the overall feasibility study and costing for the project. So yes, it's possible within that utility lot, but again, very steep grades make it a little bit less desirable than we would like.
Yeah, thank you, Will. And reading into the question a little bit, hopefully not reading it in the wrong direction. In terms of constructability, we do build trails over top of utility corridors quite often. A lot of concrete sidewalks across the city exist over top of those utility corridors. So it is something that we do all the time. So yes, yeah, very much possible from a underground utilities perspective. But as Will mentioned, some of the slopes may make that difficult. All right, reading the next question. The current Red Willow Trail to Kingswood is already complete and serves the community well. One enhancement would be to make it even easier for the folks on the north side of the river to access the existing south side trail. Therefore, the question is, what would be the cost to add a sidewalk to the north side or downstream side of the bridge at Boudreaux Road? Also consider that the maintenance costs would be nominal. All right. So Justin, do you want to try that one?
I can jump in on that one. I mean, that's a tough one to answer at this point. Putting in a sidewalk on the other side of Boudreaux Bridge, since it isn't currently set up that way, it would have to be cantilevered out over the bridge. And first, a rough look at that, it would be a pretty expensive option, something like that, without diving into the details too much. So, I mean, definitely something we can take a look at, but first shot at that, I think it'd be quite an expensive option.
Thanks, Justin. So kind of a similar comment, is there any consideration to put a pedestrian bridge across the river to connect the Red Willow Trail in Kingswood? So thank you very much for that question. I can actually answer this one, even though it's a technical one. Unfortunately, at this time, it is not within scope to look at additional footbridges within this project. We did recently, within the last few years, look at a couple of different footbridges on the other side of the river, closer to Ray Gibbon Drive, and we know that the cost of them is somewhere in the $7 to $8 million at a conceptual level cost. So it's quite cost prohibitive at this time to look at crossing the river with another footbridge. That doesn't mean it couldn't be considered in the future, but it is not part of this project. Justin, do you want to add anything to that one, or Aaron?
Nope, I think that's got it.
All right, and one more comment is having to put in stairs and reducing accessibility shouldn't be viewed as a barrier to the project proceeding unless the cost is extremely prohibitive, of course. We have all kinds of provincial parks, national parks, historic sites, etc., where accessible trails aren't possible and stairs are used instead. Where there's a will, there's a way. So thank you for the comment, and obviously stairs is something we're considering. They are costly and they are barriers to access, but they are the only option in some segments, so we are considering that. So I'm just going to look. I see, I'm sorry if I say your name wrong, Riz, and I'm just going to unmute you. You may need to also unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Questions, a lot of planning, but a lot of money. How much do you think is really feasible for a huge project like this and that the taxpayers would be willing to take on?
Will, you want to take a stab at that one first?
Throw around some figures here.
So it's premature at this point to even give specific costing. We're still exploring the potential trail alignments, and before we even go through the exercise of figuring out option 1, 2, and 3 for the potential costs, we wanted to get public feedback and engagement. So yeah, it's kind of premature right now to say if what the exact costs, even on a ballpark figure, would be. So the other part of it is we're showing this as 3 different segments. So that doesn't necessarily mean that all 3 segments would be going as one project. It could be subdivided into just section 2 or just section 1 or just section 3 or any permutation thereof.
All right, and if this doesn't get satisfactory approval by the public, what's the alternative?
Yeah, I can kind of give a stab at that. A large part of the reason we are doing this feasibility study first, instead of just jumping into design options and things like that, is the decision might be not to go ahead. And this question and this idea of this trail connection has been floating around, and different kind of studies have been done, and conversations have been had. So a large part of this is answering the question of, can we build this connection, and should we build this connection, and what would it look like if we were to build? So if the answer is no, for any number of reasons, cost being potentially one of them, at least we'll have the question answered. So that's one of the outcomes that could come out of this, is at least we know that it's not supported by the public and it's too costly, or whatever the reasons for not moving forward, and we have that solid answer, and kind of put that question to bed.
Hopefully it's not going to be just like the service project that we're still paying for it and we're not getting any money for it. We've been paying taxes all our lives and service is still losing money. And you're telling me you're going to build this white elephant again for us to pay taxes and lose money again.
Yeah, so I'm hearing a lot of emphasis on cost and construction and long-term costs as your concern.
So you're aware that it is a big issue for sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, seeing, oh, nope, not seeing anything there. We'll give it, maybe what we'll do is we'll just, oh, there we go. We'll give you, we're just kind of feeling like we're wrapping up here. I do see a comment, not a question, but wanted to highlight that I'm looking forward to this connection being made. Orchard Court area needs more connections. So many people walk along the river in this area, and a formal trail will be as well used by Oakmont residents and others. So I will say we've been doing some focus groups and hearing from different people, and there are many perspectives. There are lots of people that have concerns around cost or privacy, but just as many excited and really wanting to see this trail connection completed, and kind of being able to do that complete little loop in and around the Oakmont neighborhood. So appreciate the comment. We're certainly hearing lots of different perspectives. And then here we go. Justin, I appreciate your response that another sidewalk added to the Boudreaux Bridge would be expensive, but don't you actually need to know? Before you discount the idea, what are you comparing that expense to? And also, what maintenance costs? Justin, did you want to elaborate, or did you want me to tackle that one?
Yeah, no, like I kind of did allude to in the previous answer. It's something we can absolutely consider as an option. So, I mean, obviously we're not going to discount any suggestions thrown out here. So something that can be taken into consideration for sure.
Yeah, I will say within the scope of this project, getting across the river isn't really within the scope of this project. So it would be an additional suggestion that we could look at, but is kind of outside the study area, and is why it hasn't really even been looked at yet. It says, so the next one, sorry, is can this team work with Riverbank Landing Development to create an east side of Riverbank Landing Trail behind the Orion closes 17 and 18 from Belrose Road to the Orchard Court cul-de-sac, and behind Orchard Court lots 104 to 98, Ravine towards the river walking bridge shown on 3B. So if I understand it, you're looking along the east side of that Riverbank Landing Trail behind Orion Close. So I'll ask, I believe this is talking about that trail connection north towards Orchard Court, Will, that we're showing as optional, kind of in that area there. Erin, is that how you're reading that?
Yeah, and I think that's, I'm guessing that that's Andy's clarification that was asked for. So I think that we should just take that back as part of the discussion notes.
Perfect. Yeah, we can certainly discuss it with them. We do know, talking about kind of the east side of Riverbank Landing, Boudreaux has replanted some of the whole trees along that eastern edge, some of the apple trees from what we know. So in some of the options, we were trying to protect those trees and not wanting to move them again, because they do have a significant heritage value. So that would be why you wouldn't have seen any of the comments on the east side of their property, as they have already relocated some of those orchard trees and we were trying to protect them, but certainly something we can bring back to the conversation with Boudreaux. So it's much is made of retaining trees, yet many of the species poplar growing have a short life prior to disease setting. Planning horizon needs to consider that protection of green space will likely lead to increased forestation. I foresee a time when residents may be demanding tree removal to facilitate open space. I'll let Erin respond to that one.
I knew that was coming to me. Thanks, Ken, for that, and definitely part of the conversation for sure. And I know some of you may have seen, we get those comments, I think, throughout the city in various different ways. So that definitely has to be part of the discussion on the long-term operations and maintenance of the area. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And again, these are aspen poplar dominated forests. So they do have a short lifespan, but it does take some time to get to those mature trees, and that is nesting habitat. So a little bit of a balance of knowing those trees will die, but not wanting to remove too many mature trees, as they are kind of important habitat species while the saplings start to grow up around them. So if approved, when would construction begin? As Will alluded to, this isn't one trail. It is 3 pieces of trail connecting to existing other pieces of trail. So it could all be constructed at once. It could all be broken into pieces. Some pieces could not be done. We do have some complexity with timing, wanting to align with the riverbank landing so that we can work together and it can make sense with their development, and they're not, they don't have solid construction timelines yet. Similarly, there's a potential project along the old Belrose alignment that may alter our construction timelines. So currently we're looking towards potentially doing some of the work potentially in 2023 or 2024. But on top of not being sure where we're going to build and what segments we're going to build, there are some factors outside of the project's control that we have to make sure that we align to. So unfortunately, an unsatisfactory response of we're not really sure yet. Looking to the next question. Has there been discussions with Dave Hout, and BCL to take him up on his offer to pay the full cost of the Red Willow Trail on the riverside of Botanica and Riverbank Landing? He stated that publicly at the second public meeting, June 2021, and at multiple public meetings and focus groups. I'm not sure. I'm taking a stab that BCL is Boudreaux Communities. No, that has not come up in any of our discussions, but thank you for bringing that to our attention. We'll circle back with our planning colleagues. They hadn't mentioned anything yet to date, but we can see if there were any commitments made, because obviously working with Boudreaux Communities and reducing the cost to the taxpayer is definitely in the best interest of the project and of our residents. All right, just that one more opportunity if you want to use that raise hand function and ask your question verbally. Just watching for that. So I think we are winding down and running out of questions. So we'll just do a little bit of a last call here, make sure that there's nothing else. Well, thank you, everyone. I do have one last question as you make your way out, just a little bit more information on next steps. As I alluded to, this process is going to take us a little bit of time to go through all of the information and all of the feedback that we've received, all of the surveys and conversations that we've had with folks. We don't anticipate on having a completed feasibility report probably now till April or so, Will. Is that right? From there, we will build some recommendations, potentially have some conversations with council. And then if feasible, if potentially going to be constructed, we would move towards detailed design. Any decisions around construction would go through the council budget funding process and would be pending budget approval and support from council. We would anticipate any segments that do move towards detailed design, if any of them do. We would come out back for public engagement to look at what design we're proposing, if there are some mitigations or compromises required in the design. So we do anticipate another round of public engagement on any segments that may move forwards towards finishing design and construction. Thank you very much, Wade. In the interim, we do have a map tool if there's any specific areas of concern, any things that you know about the area. We have a map tool. We do have a project questions tool. You can reach me or any of the project team members either by email, our email's available, or through that questions tool. And then of course our survey is active and available until February 6th. We will close that survey on February 6th and commit to sharing those results publicly within 2 to 3 weeks. It might take us a little while because we're getting some great responses. So it might take us a little bit to filter through all of that information. So that is kind of our next steps. As you folks are making your way out, we do have one last question for you, if you wouldn't mind responding. In the chat on your way out this evening. Again, we thank you very much for your feedback, for your time, for your insights and additional pieces of information. So as you're leaving in the chat box, if you'd like to respond based on what is important to you, as well as what you have heard is important for others, what is your final piece of advice to the city as they consider decisions for potential trail alignments and construction? So as you're making your way out, if you could throw some thoughts into the chat there, that would be really appreciated. Again, thank you for your time and good night.